Greetings everybody! Sorry I missed my book video uploads last week. I had quite a lot of stuff going on and I just really couldn't find the time. So I'm going to try and make it up to you with this week's videos and I hope that these will be fun. So today I am just going to give a little update on which books I've recently read the last couple of weeks as part of my Read What You Own challenge. Okay, so this is where I am on my Read What You Own challenge. So I'm trying to read 100 books that I currently own before I let myself buy any more. Now, of course, when I clear this 100 books, I still have several hundred books here, paperbacks and hardbacks that I haven't read, and that's not to mention ebooks. But I am on 26 out of 100, which I think is pretty good because I started this at the 1st of January. So that's actually a lot more than I normally read over a 5 or 6 week period. And my annual target, I do set a reading target for myself for the year of 60 books. I just think, you know, 1 a week-ish seems reasonable to me. I have set it at like 120 or something before, and then I feel like a failure if I can't hit it, and it negatively influences what I'm picking up because I start picking up books based on length rather than whether or not I really want to read them right now or whatever. So yeah, I'm on 26 out of 100 for my Read What You Own and 26 out of 60 for my annual target. I feel like I might smash my annual target if I keep going at this rate, but I have got 8 books to briefly discuss with you here. So the first one I read, I am really excited. I got an ebook. I don't have a cover or anything to show you because this was an ARC, and I did check with the author to make sure it was okay for me to talk about it. It was a novella called Skybreakder from Tyler J. Welch, and you might remember me talking about Ajram, which was Tyler's debut novel. This is a debut novella, and I have already had words with him about how dare he, because the quality of his writing and his prose, his story construction, his ability to create atmosphere, the way that he describes his settings, he's such a good writer, and I'm personally, as an aspiring author myself, pretty jealous about it. Got a bit of the green-eyed envy thing going because he's so good, and he doesn't even typically write the kind of horror that's like really up my street. He's very sort of old worldy, mythology based, and I honestly don't really read a lot in that kind of subgenre. It almost strays into like, not, I want to say dark fantasy, but I don't know if I fully understand what dark fantasy is. Nothing like romantic or anything, just, you know, fantasy with evil stuff. Is that a thing? Is that a subgenre? Anyway, so Skybreakder, I can't talk too much about it. I don't know when it's coming out, but I will keep you updated as I know, because I'm really excited to get a physical copy of this when it's released. It's about a Maya tribe and one particular character in the tribe, and they're going on a journey because they want to summon something, and it's for the good. It's not evil or anything like that. And yeah, so they take a trek together, and then, you know, it's a horror story, so maybe things happen along the way, or maybe it doesn't end up as they plan, but they're good intentions and everything. And the thing that I really liked, firstly, the story was just really good. It was very character driven, but still quite punchy in the pacing. It didn't drag its heels going where it was gonna go, and the end scenes were great. Such great horror. Like, this is the kind of horror that if the thought of this doesn't fill you with horror and dread, then you're dead inside. Really fun, really fun horror. But my favorite thing about it was the way that Tyler has written it. So we're alternating between the first person perspective of the young woman that we're following in the tribe, and she's got sort of like a burgeoning relationship with one of the men, and we're kind of just going through her personal journey. And because it's written in the first person, it's it makes us get to know her very quickly, and also get a really good sense of the people around her and how her community works, you know, the potential for the relationship and things like that. And I thought that this was a really, really good way to give us a lot to care about with the character, like let us get to know them really fast in a shorter length book than a novel, because I do find that sometimes with novellas, that's where novellas fall short for me a little bit more. Sometimes they read like extended short stories that are all about the idea and the plot, and there's not a lot of time to give you really good character work, but Tyler has nailed it with this. So it alternates between first person perspective of our main character, and then we switch into this third person narration that's giving us sort of this overarching view of the story and the plot as it's unfolding. And I thought that that was such an interesting narrative choice, because what Tyler has managed to do here, and I have never seen it done this effectively, at least before, but I can't think of another example off the top of my head where things were just nailed across the board like this for me. So I care more about character than plot. I love a good plot though, but I can forgive a sort of flimsy plot if the characters are really good and I care about what they're doing. But in the first person narrative parts, Tyler has nailed character, absolutely nailed it. And then in these third person perspectives that almost read like second person, because it feels like an old man with a nice storytelling voice is like telling us the tale. He's nailed the plot as well, so this is like a double whammy, like everything you would hope to feel covered in writing if this is the kind of thing that you look for in writing. So yeah, I talked way more about that than I meant to, but that's, you know, as soon as I'm able to post a review on Amazon, as soon as it's listed, this is going to get a glowing written review from me as well. So highly recommend that, and I'll come back to this video when there are sales links available and put them in the description, but I'm really excited to see that released. Next up, another novella by Rowland that was brand new. It was released last month, called Optic Nerve. So this was such a fun story. If you're someone who likes a nasty little sting in the tail kind of story, this was a really, really great one. So this is about a guy who works in the medical field, and he's been working on a drug hopefully that will eradicate eye problems, and by, you know, making connections in the brain and He's having a frustrating time with it because it's just not getting approved for trials, and there's, you know, delays and pushbacks and blah 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 blah. And he decides that he's going to test this drug on himself instead, just trial run it on himself. And he almost immediately starts hearing a female voice in his head, and he assumes that it's the result of a brain tumor or something to do with the medication has set something off, and he assumes that he's very ill, but he starts to develop a relationship with this voice anyway, and this is impacting his marriage. He's already told us a bit about his wife. He really doesn't look at her very favorably before this started happening to him, and he starts to really prefer the company of the voice in his head. Now, you know me, I don't really enjoy mental health stories. This wasn't coming across like a mental health story, and I'm not going to say whether it was or whether he was telepathically connected to somebody else elsewhere, but there was such a great ending to this that I didn't see coming. I started to suspect a bit but really near the end about what might happen, and it was just a really good story, headed by an unreliable narrator, because on the face of it, this guy is presenting himself like he's a good guy. He wants to cure blindness. He's going to test the drug on himself. But really, it starts to feel like this is coming from an almost narcissistic place. Like he wants to be perceived as a good guy, but he's speaking very unfavorably about his wife, and maybe she's a terrible wife and mother, as he says, or maybe he's not a very switched on husband and father. We don't know, because we don't know if he's telling the truth to himself or us. So I really enjoyed the character dynamics in this as well. I thought it was really good, and yes, I wholeheartedly recommend that if you're looking for sort of like a short, sharp read of a novella. It was really, really enjoyable. I'm gonna say this wrong. I used to think I had a good vocabulary, and then I started making these videos, and the number of times I hear myself say something, and half the time I don't even catch that I've said it wrong, I realise when I'm editing. But this is either called The Ravening or The Ravening by Daniel Church, and I've already mispronounced one of his books before. So, The Ravening, we're going to call it The Ravening. I'm so sorry, Daniel, if I say that wrong. So anyway, this was a really, really, really fun story, and it ticked a lot of boxes for me. It is about a woman, again, whose name I don't remember. I'm really sorry about that. And she doesn't like herself very much. She's not very nice to herself. She has a kind of wicked, sarcastic sense of humor that makes her very endearing, and I was just she was very relatable. I thought, I know a lot of people, and I myself have felt like it's, you know, afraid of forming attachments and things like that to other people. She's been let down quite a lot, and she's kind of a go it alone kind of person. But then she meets this woman, and they start getting together, and that just feels like something really special. And she finds out quite early on into this relationship that she's pregnant from sort of like a fleeting ex, like some guy that she was seeing for like a month, and you know, she decided she wasn't interested. He was a bit sort of rich and pompous, and you know, really not her speed, a kind of person. And her girlfriend is really supportive about it. She's like, don't worry, we'll take care of this. And our main character vehemently does not want to have children. So I was so intrigued about where this was going to go, because there is an opening, like a prologue, and it's our main character as a little girl, and her mum gets taken by a monster. And again, we don't know if she was actually taken by a monster, or if this was like, you know, she was taken by a person, and like as a child she reimagined this into a more nightmarish scenario of what she experienced and all of this. But she is very much of the opinion as an adult still that a monster took her mum. So I was really worried, like I was really intrigued about where this was going to line up and what this all meant. And then she is kidnapped and taken to a facility by people who want her to have this baby. And if there's one thing I love, it's a cult. And I guess I couldn't really, this was quite unconventional. I say cult, if you're picturing like groups of people in robes, or like a whole village, or like a big number of people, like scrap that out of your head, because this book doesn't do that. It's just a couple of people, and you get the feeling that there's a wider network of people that feel the same way, but she's just being kept with a couple of people. And it started to merge all of these like great elements for me of what I love in stories. So we've got a really relatable main character that we're rooting for in quite the debacle, and the stakes for her are high. She does not want to be pregnant, and she does not want to give birth. She doesn't want to have a child, and she especially doesn't want to be giving birth to a child that's going to be taken away from her. She doesn't know what's going to happen to her after. She doesn't know what they're going to do with the kid. She doesn't know. We only know what she knows, which is hardly anything. So the stakes are really high. She's in peril. And then we've got this monster stuff, and I guess I can't really talk any more about it than that. Like those are sort of like the introductory things that set the story up. I don't really want to talk beyond that. There's a couple of things that I didn't like about it, but overall this was such a great read. I'm still recommending it to everybody. Like the things I didn't like about it really didn't dampen my overall opinion of the whole book. It like my gripes didn't ruin anything for me, if that makes sense, because of everything else that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed it so much. I kind of wish that we'd stayed on the pregnancy thing for the whole book, because there are other elements that come in that sort of take precedence, and I was more interested in that. And there are dream sequences, and if you've been watching my channel for any length of time, or you read my reviews, you might already know that dream sequences are my #1 pet peeve. I don't know why I hate them so much. I think it's because a lot of the time they're used as filler for atmosphere or something. They're not used as filler here. They're very important here, but I just can't get over it if I know it's a dream sequence. My brain just starts going, oh, but that's nothing to do with the book, the story of the writer. That's me. I just have such a weird bias against it. Maybe it's because I'm always having crap dreams and I just don't like reading about them. We get into books that I've actually got copies of now. Definitely said this wrong when I recommended it before. I'm not going to talk much about this because I've already talked about it in a recent video, but this is Coup de Grace. I think I said Coup de Grace last time, like an idiot, and I'm probably saying gra wrong. Is it even pronounced? I know I said coup instead of coup. Anyway, this by Sofia Ajram. This is definitely a psychological mental health story about someone who is suicidal, and then they find themselves in a underground, like a subway station, and they just can't get out. They can't find the way out. They meet someone else there. It's very metaphor based, very sort of analogy ridden. It's very layers and layers and layers beneath the surface. Some of them very obvious, like, you know, not subtle, and then other, but the more you think about this, the more little details you pay attention to, the more there is. And it's got a really interesting literary device, basically a choose your own adventure kind of thing towards the end, that really takes you from a passive reader to an active participant in the main character's life, so and decisions. So I wholeheartedly recommend this. This is not a book for everyone. I can't stress that enough. If you're someone who struggles with depression, things like that, especially SI, I would maybe read some trigger warnings if you are triggered by things like that. It's not a light read at all. It made me feel very down, but very effective, and I think it's a really good piece of work. I finally got round to reading Slewfoot by Brom, and initially I have to tell you I wasn't loving it. Initially I was loving it because we've got I think her name is Abatha, the main character. So she's sort of this is set in puritanical times in a really religious little town or village, and she's married to her husband, and his brother-in-law is like a horrible piece of work that really upholds the patriarchal, misogynistic views of the time and the town that they're in and the society that they've formed here. You know, women can be put in the stocks and arrested for, you know, talking back, things like that. This is what we're talking. And it's not a great place for Abatha because she has never been that kind of woman. She's married into this town through her husband. She wasn't living like this as a girl. And she also comes from a line of women that, you know, use magic charms and, you know, stones and herbs and, you know, heal ailments and things. And it's obviously going to be very frowned upon in a society that's all about God, and they think of everything else as witchcraft. And then something happens to her husband, and it really puts her in a lot of danger and insecurity about her home, her finances, the little farm they were running, all of this. And her brother-in-law is really trying to take all of this away from her. But really the main problem that everyone has with her is that she's just not cowing to the men like every other woman. Like, she tries to bite her tongue, but her personality is just not like that. She's a great protagonist. The story is really atmospheric. The time period is just nailed. You can really see everything. Some creatures emerge, and there's magic, and this is definitely people always put this in a sort of folk horror category. I don't know. I mean, I guess it is like old world folk horror, though not like again, people in cloaks you know, worshipping a deity or something. This feels more pagan, maybe more natural, more like of the earth kind of stuff. There's a lot of debate about sort of morality, what's right, and people as well. This really examines people and how they're acting when they're frustrated or feel powerless. Like, I would say that's the main theme, is like power dynamics and what, like, different types of powerlessness and how people respond to feeling that way. There was one thing, there are these little creatures that appear, and I think his name is Creek. I've forgotten, but he's a floating fish. I couldn't get over it. I just couldn't get over it for the longest time. It took it down from, I would say, like a 4.5 to a 3-star read for me. I couldn't get over it. Every time he appeared, I was like, but he's a little floating fish with a boy face. And it seemed so silly to me. But when we get to the final act of this story, it was so explosively unexpected and dark and bloody and great that gripe dissolved completely, and this was amazing. There's also beautiful artwork in here that, you know, I love a little artwork in a book, but the paintings are, you know, oh, there we are. I'll show you Creek. So this is Creek. The pictures are just so beautiful. What a beautiful beautiful inclusion in a book like this. So yeah, if you're a fan of a witchy read, something a little bit old school folky, something that's dealing with, you know, just good and evil and what even is that and all that. Like, that's probably a great book. It's also a really good, like, spooky season read, I would say, although I read it, you know, in the winter at the start of this year, so who cares. Next, I read You by Rowland Kepnes because I'm a big fan of the show. Well, maybe the first season. I did like seasons 2 and 3. I thought they started to get a little ridiculous, and then season 4, I have higher hopes for season 5 for the final. But anyway, I was really interested in reading this because this is about Joe. He's the protagonist, and it's an unusual protagonist because Joe is a stalker, and it's not even like he's presented like he thinks he's doing the right thing. So the show really, I think that the show was actually an excellent adaptation because it adapted the material into something that was more watchable. Because if you've seen the show and you haven't read this, Book Joe is despicable. He is disgusting. His language is vile. His thoughts are more mean-spirited and they're more crass. You know, he's like, in the show, I think they couldn't have done him like the Book Joe in the show because nobody would have wanted to have watched him. He's too unpleasant in the book to be able to watch over a season of like 10 episodes or something. Also, Book Beck is very different. So she's portrayed in the show as, you know, she's a nice girl, she's real pretty, she's got stuff going for her, she's a very flawed character, she does have sort of misgivings and stuff. And, you know, sort of like more negative character traits. And the point in the show really is that it doesn't really matter. You don't have to be a perfect woman for someone like Joe to fixate on you. He's drawn to who he's drawn to for various reasons. I think he's attracted to people that he considers damaged, probably because he feels a bit superior and like he's, you know, there's less chance of him being rejected if he's, you know, giving the time of day to someone that he thinks he could do better than. That's how I read it. And so Beck in the show is lovely. I think generally she's fine. I think people are a little bit too critical of Beck. I think people miss the point that she isn't supposed to be perfect. That is the point, that any average woman could be victimized in the way that Joe is doing this. But anyway, this is about Joe's love story, and he falls in love with Beck, and then it's about him trying to woo her and court her, and then what happens if he actually gets her. And then through the book, if you haven't seen the show already, you start to worry about what his intentions are, and, you know, maybe he's done some stuff in the past, like have there been other women in Beck's shoes. And I was really interested in the book because I saw the show first, and it's so the conversation about the show is so much fun because the people love Joe, and I think they made Joe much more humorous. They gave him not like redeeming qualities, but that's how people see him. They've just made him a bit more layered in the show. They've given him likable qualities, not redeemable qualities though, because you cannot be redeemed if you're a serial killer. But he, you know, Penn Badgley, who plays Joe in the show, he's a nice looking guy. He's sweet, he's charismatic, he's you know, he's funny, he likes to read, he seems like on paper a great guy. You know, he has an affinity for trying to look out for children who don't have good caregivers. That is something they completely made up, that wasn't in the book at all. He develops, you know, a friendship with the kid that lives next door, Paco, whose living situation is horrible, and he looks out for him. So the audience like sort of like glom onto these things about him and, you know, consider him romantic and stuff, even though we're in his head and we can hear him figuring out how to manipulate Beck and worm his way into her life, and somehow people are still rooting for him even though he is 100% the villain of this story. And it's so like, yeah, the conversation about the show was interesting to me because Beck gets criticized more than Joe does, and I think that says something about the society we still live in. But anyway, so I really enjoyed the book. I think that the book felt more horror than the show because Joe is vile and scary, and because we spend the entire book in his head, it's a dark, horrible place to be, and I think that Carol and Kepnes wrote something really good here, in terms of a horror story. So yeah, I would recommend this if you've seen the show and you haven't bothered to pick the book up because you're like, well, I've seen the story. This is different. This is a different flavour of the characters and a different flavour of the whole story. This wasn't on my 100 books list because I made a list of the 100 books I wanted to read specifically, but I couldn't resist it. I got it in my last Abominable Book Club box. It's Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by McLeod Chapman. This is the most political book I've ever read, and I don't really like avoid them or gravitate towards anything political because, to be honest, you'll find social politics at the very least in almost everything you read. It's unavoidable, it's the world we live in, but this really does speak of the fears of America right now. I was hesitant to pick this up because I'm not going to get political here, but I will say I am very scared for where things are going and things that have already happened, and I spend a lot of time thinking about my American friends. So I was a bit worried about picking this up because I read the back cover blurb, but I don't normally do that. And this is about a guy who feels like he's lost his family to the right-wing media, and there's other stuff, there's supernatural stuff going on here. It's not all about that. I did think this is like a really relevant story, and I don't know if I'd say I enjoyed it because it's a bit real, but this wasn't my favourite. I think because in the beginning we're with a guy who he's basically cut his parents off, his wife, they've been racist towards his wife, and he has a mixed race child now, and he doesn't really want to have his family around his wife and kid because of their views, understandably, but then his mother has been calling him at all hours of the day, these frantic, panicked calls, because she's sort of been indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking, and there's frequent mention of like the day is coming, the day of the reckoning or something, the day, I can't remember what they called it now, sorry, but there's a day that's coming anyway, an event of some sort, and then he suddenly can't get hold of his parents, so he drives across, a few hours to make sure that they're okay, and they are not, and then so I was really invested, and there's some really disturbing shit in there, but I was really invested in the story, and then we switch over to his brother's family, and we're with them for almost all the rest of the book as they're sort of changing and getting engrossed in all this stuff, and it was very unpleasant, and there are kids in this story, and we're kind of like jumping around the characters a bit, and I was finding it quite hard to focus on who I should be paying attention to or who I should be caring about. And I was like, well, what happened to the guy I was invested in that. I don't know if maybe that was the point, because I felt a little bit overwhelmed by things happening and actions, and that is very much what's going on now. I feel like there was some sort of weird psychic foresight that Clay had, because he obviously didn't write this book in the last couple of months. He would have written this probably like a year ago, maybe even longer. But yeah, I just found it very uncomfortable, really unpleasant. I am looking forward to my next Clay McLeod Chapman read. I liked the writing and stuff, but I think the story, I don't know if the story was just a bit too, maybe I should have picked it up in a few years' time, in the hope, I say that with the hope that things are going to get better. But yeah, I don't know, maybe it's the timing. So even though I was on board with the messaging, I think I was just filled with dread. Lastly, this is the most unique book that I have read so far this year, and one of the most, this is really unique, full stop. So this is Mason Gorey, A Haunting Catskill Elegy by Shane D. Keane and Stephanie Ellis. So I had no idea what this was when Stephanie gave this to me. She gifted me this copy when I saw her at FantasyCon last year. Thank you, Stephanie, if you see this. And I had no idea what I was in for. So I'm gonna have to read you the back cover because I can't. I'm going to mess up explaining the book to you otherwise. Camp Catskill, near the small New York town of Wilton, was once an idyllic spot for summer and fall getaways. Surrounded by a wild thicket of black walnut, aspen, and evergreen, reflected by the reservoir and overshadowed by its dam, Camp Catskill seemed like the perfect destination for young Rachel Stark to spend her summer interning and experiencing the world beyond England. I've tried to read this several times and I keep putting the inflection in weird places, and I'm not starting again. I'm really sorry, so just bear with me for this next paragraph. But this Catskill hamlet harbours a dark secret, a sordid past, and an ancient curse that demands a blood toll each summer. Unbeknownst to Rachel, her own familial history is intricately entwined with that of Wilton, and her arrival will spark a conflagration of murder and mayhem unlike any town has seen before. So, I'd say standard horror story fare, and I mean that like not as an insult or anything, like, but you know, you read that, you're like, okay, horror story. But what is crazy about this book is that it's told in verse and prose poetry. So let me just show you, a little few pages so you can see. This is not a conventionally written story, and I think this has got to be the first book I have ever picked up that has one central narrative that is told in separate pieces of prose and poetry. And it was so interesting. Now, I am not the person to talk to you about poetry or like poetic prose, really. I never really enjoyed poetry. I still am not very interested in it as an adult. I enjoy beautiful prose though. I do enjoy, I enjoy poetic writing styles, but actual poetry isn't for me. So I guess maybe if Stephanie hadn't given this to me, maybe I wouldn't have picked it up. However, I do very much enjoy a good story, and I really enjoyed the story, and I was so surprised to find that I was really enjoying how it was being told. This isn't the kind of book that you sit down and you just like hammer it out, because again, prose and poetry, so there's a lot of under the surface stuff, subtext, metaphor, things, different ways to read into things, and I just thought it was so interesting I thought it was really interesting the way that the narrative amps up as we go through the book. So I noticed so there's a few different sort of styles here, like different poetic styles, different formats, different line counts. I can't remember any poetry terms, I'm really sorry, but different presentations of poems and how they read. And I did notice that as the book goes on, the tone and style of the poetry kind of reflects the tension and the pacing of the narrative, which I thought was a great touch. I don't know if that naturally just came up with the writers or if that was something that they consciously decided to do, but I really enjoyed, we get towards the end, we're getting these like really short punchy lines, with just a few words, these like running sentences, so yeah, I think this is just such a creative piece of work, and if you're someone who likes poetry and novels, I think that this would be a great choice for you because it's got everything. I've never seen a book done like this before in my life, and I also, can we just say the cover art is absolutely gorgeous as well. So this is Cemetery Gates Media put this out, so I would, if you're looking for something different, this is the one. This ticks a lot of boxes. I read a lot of stories, and the storytelling style, I have some favorite narrative styles, but generally there's only a few ways to tell a story, narratively speaking. So yeah, this was like really out of the box, and I really liked it. Just realized how long I've been talking, and I'm not sure if you've read any of these books. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. on opinions, especially if you've read You and you've seen the show. I would really love to talk a little bit more about that. I'm thinking about doing a sort of like art of adaptation whole video about the book and the show, and what I think works, because I'd love to, you know me, I love to I love to talk. Oh, she really does. She never shuts up. You think you have to put up with it with a video? Try living here. Anyway, subscribe or else. So I think I'll call it there. I will see you tomorrow as I panic my way through another section of Silent Hill 2, and then on Saturday with a book video, and I've got an author interview that I'm really excited about on Sunday, so bleed!